That woman called 911 way too many times in a single hour. I was just sitting there, sipping coffee with an old friend at my cabin when she decided to alert the authorities, claiming I was involved in some shady weapons deal with a suspicious person. In her twisted logic, that alone was enough to label us as dangerous criminals. What she didn't realize was that some names and faces aren't meant to be casually dropped into police reports. That one reckless phone call was about to trigger a chain of events she never could have imagined it as something so serious. It would require intervention from my SWAT unit. What followed turned our quiet neighborhood completely upside down. But before I dive into the chaos that followed, I want to know where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Now, let me take you back to where all this began. It was a picture-perfect Saturday morning in April, the kind that makes you feel lucky to live in a place like Pinewood Heights. With its tree-lined streets and well-kept houses, it felt like the kind of suburb where nothing too crazy could ever happen. About 8 months ago, I bought myself a modest cabin-style home here using the savings I'd built up over 8 years as a SWAT commander with Metro Police. It wasn't extravagant, just a simple 2-bedroom place with a wraparound porch, perfect for peaceful morning coffees. Or so I thought. That morning, Detective Lisa Rodriguez, an old friend from the academia, had dropped by to catch up and go over some documents from a cold case she was handling. We were out back on the deck, flipping through old photos and files, just two off-duty officers enjoying the weekend. That's when I saw Hira Eleanor Whitmore. She lived next door and had unofficially appointed herself as the reigning queen of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association. From her kitchen window, which gave her a clear view into my yard, she was staring at us like a hawk watching its prey. Eleanor was the kind of woman who wore tailored suits just to check her mail and carried a designer bag when taking out the trash. Her platinum bob was always perfectly styled, and she looked at people like their mere presence was offensive. In the short time I lived there, she had already filed several complaints against me. My grass was apparently too long by a 1/4 inch. My trash bins were 6 inches off the proper placement, and she hated that I parked my department-issued SUV in my own driveway, claiming it clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. Lisa and I were laughing over a ridiculous arrest story from years ago when I noticed Eleanor vanish from her window. I didn't think much of it until about 20 minutes later, when my phone rang. It was my sister Emma, who worked dispatch at the same department I commanded. "Jake," she said, her voice laced with confusion and mild amusement, "I just got the weirdest call about your house." I blinked. "What kind of call?" She read off the report in her official dispatcher tone. "Caller claims there's an illegal weapons trade happening at 247 Pine Ridge Drive." "That's you, right?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "You've got to be kidding." Lisa gave me a curious look as I put the call on speaker. Emma continued, "She says she saw 2 people exchanging weapons in the backyard, passing documents, and acting suspicious, definitely criminal," she said. Lisa burst out laughing so hard she almost spilled her coffee. "Do your neighbor thinks police case files are contraband?" "That's gold. I've been called a lot of things, but never an arms dealer." I wasn't laughing. Emma wasn't done either. "She's actually reported you multiple times," she said. 12 calls in the last 2 months. According to Eleanor's running list of 911 complaints, I was laundering money because I received packages during the day, conducting surveillance because I looked out my front window, running an illegal business because friends visited me, and in my personal favorite, I was part of a crime syndicate because I ordered pizza at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. She told dispatch, and I quote, "And no one orders food that late unless they're feeding a gang," Emma added, trying not to laugh. And it didn't stop there. Eleanor would often call back within the hour to add evidence. Just last week, she reported that I was transmitting coded messages because I waved at the mailman. Right then, my phone buzzed with a notification from the community forum. Eleanor had posted what she clearly believed was an urgent neighborhood alert. "Warning. Suspected weapons trafficking in progress at 247 Pine Ridge. Multiple suspicious individuals exchanging dangerous materials in daylight. Authorities contacted. Residents should remain on high alert." The post had already drawn confused replies from neighbors asking if she meant the police officer who lived there. Eleanor responded with wild conspiracy theories about how I was using my badge as a cover. Lisa shook her head as she read over my shoulder. She's either paranoid, a broken bar, or hiding something. People this obsessed with other people's lives usually have their own skeletons. She wasn't wrong. I've seen that pattern more times than I can count. Those who shout the loudest about law and order are often the first ones to break it. Before I could say anything else, my phone rang again. It was Emma. "Jake," she said, more serious now. "She just called again. Says you and your A partner are now mocking law enforcement." Her words, as the suspect was seen laughing and pointing at innocent citizens. "She's demanding a full property search." I glanced over at Eleanor's house. There she was again, posted at the window, scribbling in a notebook like she was compiling evidence for a federal investigation. When she saw me looking, she didn't even bother to look away. Instead of backing down, she raised her hand in a dramatic stop right there, emotional, like she was trying to place me under citizen's arrest from her lawn. "You know what, Emma," I said, making a decision that would end up changing everything. "Send a patrol car. If Mrs. Whitmore wants to mess with police reports, let's give her the official process. Let's see how her story holds up when actual officers start asking actual questions." What I didn't realize at the time was that Eleanor's obsession with reporting me wasn't just neighborhood-level paranoia. It was about to expose something far more disturbing, something that would shed light on why she was so hell-bent on casting me as the villain in our little suburban soap opera. Because sometimes, the people who scream the loudest about crime are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. 15 minutes after I hung up with Emma, a Metro police cruiser rolled to a stop at my curb. Officers Martinez and Chen stepped out. Guys I'd worked with before on joint assignments. They nodded professionally as they approached, trying their best to treat this as just another routine call despite how ridiculous it already was. "Commander Thompson," Martinez said with a smirk he couldn't quite hide, "we received a report about some suspicious activity going on at this address." Lisa flashed her badge as they got closer. "Detective Rodriguez, Metro. I can personally confirm the so-called suspicious documents were nothing more than case files from a 15-year-old cold case. Unless flipping through unsolved homicide records now qualifies as weapons trafficking, we're in the clear." Before the officers could even wrap up their notes, Eleanor burst from her house like she was leading a courtroom drama in real life. She was clutching a thick manila envelope and dressed in what could only be described as her testimony outfit, a pearls, blazer, the whole 9 yards. "Thank goodness you're here," she declared, striding across her flawless lawn with the energy of a woman who thought she was saving the country. "I've been documenting criminal behavior at this house for months. Today, they finally slipped up and did it in daylight." She handed Officer Martinez the folder with all the gravity of submitting evidence at a murder trial. "Everything is cataloged, dates, times, even photographic proof. This man has been operating some sort of crime ring right in our community." Chen opened the folder and glanced through it. I watched his face shift from polite interest to stunned disbelief. Inside were pictures of me taking out the trash, complete with timestamps and notes suggesting that disposing of garbage at exactly 7:15 a.m. every Tuesday must be part of some criminal pattern. There were images of Lisa arriving earlier that morning, annotated with comments implying she was scouting the area. The most absurd entry, a 5-page breakdown titled "Suspicious Vehicle Movement," which boiled down to me leaving for work at different times depending on whether I had an early morning tactical briefing or just office paperwork. "Ma'am," Martinez said cautiously, "these look like completely ordinary activities. Taking out the trash, collecting mail, and having visitors don't count as criminal conduct." But Eleanor was just getting warmed up. She pulled out a hand-drawn diagram at her version of a criminal network flowchart. It included the UPS guy, my lawn care guy, and Mrs. Patterson from down the street, who sometimes borrowed my lawnmower. "You need to search his house," she insisted, voice rising. "I know he's hiding something, probably in the fridge. That's where people always hide the important stuff." Chen and Martinez exchanged a look I recognized instantly. It was the kind of look cops give each other when someone says something oddly specific and possibly incriminating. "Why mention a fridge unless you had personal knowledge of hiding things there?" Lisa caught it too. I saw her quietly jot something down in her phone. "Mrs. Whitmore?" I asked. "Why do you think someone would hide evidence in a refrigerator?" Her face turned a deep shade of red. She started rambling about how everyone knows that and it's just common sense, but she couldn't offer a straight answer. While Eleanor continued unraveling in front of the officers, my phone buzzed again. Emma was calling. I picked up. "Jake," she said, voice tense. "I've been digging into Eleanor Whitmore's 911 history. She's made 31 calls in the last 3 months, and not just about you, but about everyone." She listed them off, reporting the mailman for a loitering, accusing an ambulance of being fake because it didn't use sirens, and lodging noise complaints against kids playing in the park. Then she paused. I could hear her typing. "But here's where it gets weird," Emma continued. 3 months ago, she called in a report about a strange smell coming from her own house. Officers were dispatched, but 20 minutes later she called back to cancel, said she'd handled it herself. My eyes went straight to Eleanor, who was now accusing me of intimidation because I was talking on the phone. "Emma," I said quietly, "can you check missing persons reports from around that time? Specifically, anyone tied to Eleanor's address?" More typing. A long pause. Then, "There's no official report, but I found a lead. A Tommy Whitmore, age 25, listed Eleanor's address as his last residence in his employment records. His social media activity stopped cold exactly 3 months ago." I ended the call and turned back to where Eleanor was still chewing out the officers. "Mrs. Whitmore," I asked casually, "how's your son Tommy? Haven't seen him around lately." Her reaction was immediate as she went pale, then flushed, then started rambling about how Tommy was on an extended vacation in Europe. "You know how kids are," she said with a shaky laugh. "They don't keep in touch." But her hands were trembling, and she kept glancing nervously back at her house, like something in there might betray her. Officer Martinez was almost finished with his report when Eleanor made the statement that sealed her fate. "You should search his refrigerator," she yelled, pointing at my house. "And while you're at it, search mine, too. I've got nothing to hide." It was a challenge too specific and too desperate to ignore. The moment Eleanor invited officers to search her house, on top of accusing me, even the patrol officers looked visibly thrown. People with nothing to hide don't usually beg for their own homes to be searched, especially when they're the ones pointing fingers. "That's very civic-minded of you, Mrs. Whitmore," Officer Chen said diplomatically. "But that won't be necessary today." As the patrol car pulled away and Eleanor disappeared back into her house, Lisa turned to me with the same look I'd seen her give crime scene photos, sharp, focused, and suspicious. "Jake," she said low, "I've worked cold cases long enough to know, when someone eagerly volunteers a home search while accusing someone else of wrongdoing, it's almost always projection. And that comment about refrigerators, that wasn't random." What I didn't realize then was that Emma was about to call me with information that would shift this whole thing from neighborhood drama to something far more sinister. That evening, after Lisa had left and I'd spent far too long staring at Eleanor's house from my kitchen window, my phone rang. It was Emma again, and her voice immediately told me this wasn't just a casual update. "Jake," she began, steady as always thanks to years of dispatcher training, but I could still hear the concern in her tone. "I went deeper into Eleanor's 911 history, and it's a lot worse than we thought. She hadn't just been making calls about me or even just about Tommy. In the last 3 months," Emma continued, "she's made reports about nearly everyone in your neighborhood. The mailman's running a drug route because he lingers at some houses too long. The landscaping crew's doing surveillance because they take pictures of yards. She even called an ambulance suspicious because it didn't use sirens when it responded to Mrs. Henderson's heart attack." I grabbed a notepad and sat down at the kitchen table. This no longer felt like a neighbor being paranoid. This was starting to look like the early stages of an actual criminal case. "Emma," I said, "go back to that call from 3 months ago, the one where she reported a strange smell coming from her house. What exactly did she say?" I heard the familiar clicking of keys as she pulled up the record. "Okay, found it. March 15th, 2:47 p.m. Eleanor called in a report of a strong, unusual odor coming from her basement. She asked for officers to check for a possible dead animal or some kind of biological hazard." She paused, but then, just 25 minutes later, 3:12 p.m. She called back and canceled the request. Told dispatch she found the source and resolved the issue herself. That timeline wouldn't leave my mind. March 15th. It matched up exactly with when Tommy's online presence went completely dark. I had spent part of the afternoon combing through Tommy's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Before that day, he'd posted constantly updates about his job at the auto parts shop, weekend plans, and frequent complaints about Eleanor, especially regarding their ongoing arguments over his father's inheritance. But after March 15th, total silence. Emma, I asked, did anyone ever follow up on what she meant by handled it herself? There was a pause, then a sigh that told me everything I needed to hear. Number. It was logged as resolved at the caller's request. Standard procedure when someone cancels a 911 call. Sure, I muttered, but procedure doesn't cover what to do if the person canceling is hiding a body. I opened my laptop and began digging in unofficially. Of course, I didn't cross any lines, but I danced dangerously close to them. Tommy Whitmore's work records confirmed it. He stopped showing up on March 16th. The day after Eleanor's canceled 911 call. His manager had tried calling for 3 straight days before marking him down for job abandonment. His bank account was even more telling. The last sign of life was March 14th. No withdrawals, no purchases, nothing since. No sign of a man traveling abroad like Eleanor had claimed. As I sifted through records, a new notification popped up from the Pinewood Heights Community Forum. Eleanor had posted again, this time defending her earlier claim about me running an illegal weapons ring. Neighbors had begun questioning her post, and the thread was blowing up. Eleanor responded to every comment with wild accusations. Jake Thompson has manipulated all of you, she wrote. This is exactly how organized crime works, earning trust, blending in, then striking. I've been compiling evidence for months. The pattern is clear. Anyone defending him is either naive or part of it. But it wasn't that post that got my attention, it was what I found further back in the thread history. A post from February titled "Concerns about Eleanor Whitmore's Behavior" had quietly gained traction. In it, neighbors were beginning to share their own unsettling experiences with her. Mrs. Patterson wrote that Eleanor had followed her teenage daughter home from school, claiming she was monitoring youth activity. The Johnsons complained she'd installed security cameras pointing directly into their backyard. The Garkas, who lived on the opposite side of her house, described how she'd accused their landscaping crew of criminal surveillance and physically blocked them from working. That was enough for me. I picked up the phone and called Lisa. Hypothetically, I asked, if someone were trying to cover up a death inside their home, what would be their biggest problem? There was a pause. I could hear her mind shift into investigative mode. Well, she said slowly, the first problem would be the smell, especially in a neighborhood this close-knit. That alone could draw attention, then dispose of it. But honestly, that's not even the immediate concern. If they had access to proper containment, they could delay it for a while. Her voice had shifted into that matter-of-fact tone she used when analyzing crime scenes. Jake, she added, why are you asking me this? Because if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, we need to tread very carefully moving forward. I explained to Lisa the timeline of Tommy's disappearance, the cancelled emergency call, and Eleanor's peculiar fixation with refrigerators and basements. She stayed silent for a moment before speaking. Jake, she said slowly, in my experience, people who are obsessively suspicious of everyone around them are often hiding something themselves. And the fact that she keeps bringing up refrigerators and even offered to let the cops search hers, that's not normal. That's either someone who's unusually confident in concealing evidence, or someone who's spent a lot of time planning exactly how to do it. The more we talked, the more it became clear that Eleanor's harassment campaign wasn't just a neighbor being nosy. It felt calculated, like she was deliberately shaping a persona of the watchful, civic-minded resident, the one who could never possibly be guilty of anything herself, because she was so busy pointing the finger at everyone else. It was a clever smokescreen, and it might have worked if she hadn't overplayed her hand. Her obsessive 911 calls, her detailed comments about hiding things in refrigerators, and her escalating defensiveness when Tommy's name came up, everything pointed to someone desperately trying to keep control of a story that was slipping away. As I ended the call with Lisa, I glanced across the yard toward Eleanor's house. Every light on the ground floor was lit up, and I could see her pacing back and forth, silhouetted behind the windows. She looked anxious, frantic, even, and I had no idea that her desperation was about to make her slip up in the most crucial way. The following morning, Lisa knocked on my door with 2 coffees and that laser-focused look I'd seen on her during tough cases. She sat down in the same spot where this whirlwind had begun just a day earlier. "Jake," she said, settling in, "I've worked cold cases for over a decade, and when something doesn't sit right, I've learned to trust my gut." I looked deeper into Tommy Whitmore's background last night, and what I found is disturbing. Apparently, 3 months before he disappeared, Tommy had contacted a probate attorney. He was preparing to challenge Eleanor's handling of his father's estate. The attorney Lisa spoke to confirmed Tommy suspected Eleanor of draining his inheritance and was preparing to demand a complete financial audit. That wasn't just a red flag, it was a potential motive. I grabbed my notepad. If we were going to move forward, we had to document everything precisely. "How much money are we talking about here?" I asked. Lisa checked her notes, the kind she always kept neatly, even when unofficial. Tommy's father had left behind assets totaling around $400,000. That included the house Eleanor was still living in, a life insurance payout, and multiple investment accounts. Everything was supposed to go to Tommy when he turned 25, which had happened in February. Eleanor was only the executor of the estate until he reached legal age, but in the months leading up to his birthday, she had withdrawn nearly $200,000 from those accounts, citing maintenance and administrative expenses. She also took out a second mortgage on the home Tommy was set to inherit, using the funds to pay off her own personal debts. She had at least 250,000 reasons to make sure Tommy never claimed his inheritance, Lisa said, her instincts as a detective sharp as ever. "And the timing? He vanishes right after speaking to a lawyer? That's no coincidence." Just as I was digesting this information, my phone buzzed with a notification that sent a jolt through me. Eleanor had just tagged me in another post on the Pinewood Heights community forum. "Urgent update, Jake Thompson is now enlisting criminal accomplices to harass local residents." Yesterday, I witnessed the same suspicious woman returning to his home, clearly planning their next move. "I have photographic proof of their ongoing conspiracy to undermine community safety." She had taken pictures of Lisa dropping by with coffee and twisted it into supposed evidence of criminal plotting. But this time, Eleanor's wild accusations weren't having the effect she expected. The neighbors had started seeing through the performance. The comments under her post were blunt and unforgiving. "That's Detective Rodriguez from Metro PD, Eleanor. She's not some criminal." "Mrs. Whitmore, are you sure you're not the problem here? This is getting absurd. Jake's a SWAT commander, not a gang leader." The tide was turning. Eleanor's frantic posts were beginning to unravel her carefully constructed image. As she melted down online, Lisa and I decided to take a more methodical approach. Using resources available to us in our professional capacities, though perhaps stretching the bounds a little, we began compiling a timeline of Eleanor's behavior in the weeks surrounding Tommy's disappearance. What we found suggested methodical planning, not a spur-of-the-moment act. 2 weeks before Tommy vanished, Eleanor had hired a cleaning service to do a deep scrub of her basement. 1 week later, she purchased an industrial freezer, explaining to the delivery team that she was prepping for potential emergencies. Just 3 days before Tommy went missing, she rented a carpet cleaner and bought multiple bottles of heavy-duty odor eliminator. Then Lisa called me over to her screen. "Jake, you need to see this," she said. I ran Eleanor's 911 calls through a voice pattern analysis tool. Eye recognition flagged something huge. 4 times in the past 3 months, someone called in using Tommy's name to cancel missing person inquiries, cases that were never officially opened. But according to the analysis, there's a 97% match. Those calls were made by Eleanor. That was the breakthrough we'd been waiting for. Eleanor hadn't just made Tommy disappear, she had gone to disturbing lengths to impersonate him and block any attempts to report him missing. And yet, the most damning evidence, a broken bar, was still ahead of us. Lisa had tapped into financial records and uncovered a pattern in Eleanor's spending that painted a picture of someone scrambling to erase her trail. In the days following Tommy's disappearance, Eleanor had made multiple cash purchases as an attempt. Clearly, To avoid leaving a digital footprint, she bought another deep freezer from a store far from her usual shopping area, picked up professional-grade cleaning products, and even consulted a lawyer under the pretense of managing estate concerns when beneficiaries are unreachable. She'd also made repeated visits to suppliers of lime and other substances commonly used for biological cleanup. "This is textbook behavior," Lisa explained as we sorted through the data. "She likely used poison if there's no traceable evidence, which would explain how she managed it without a struggle. Then she used that new freezer to preserve the body while she quietly siphoned off his assets." Lisa believed the infamous 911 call about a foul odor was likely made during the transfer of Tommy's remains to a more concealed location. It was all chilling to consider, and even more disturbing was how assured Eleanor seemed that she would never face consequences. As if sensing the noose tightening, Eleanor's behavior escalated. She brought on legal counsel and started threatening me with lawsuits for harassment and defamation. She accused me of conducting illegal surveillance through my so-called criminal connections. Then came her latest move via an absurd petition demanding my removal from the neighborhood over vague claims of incompatible lifestyle choices. But Eleanor's greatest blunder was still to come. In a fit of paranoia and obsession with controlling the narrative, Eleanor reached out to the media. 2 days after issuing legal threats, she called Channel 7 News and insisted they look into what she described as widespread corruption and criminal plotting in Pinewood Heights. "The first I heard of it was when reporters started blowing up my phone for a statement." Ironically, Eleanor's efforts to tarnish my reputation were about to illuminate her own crimes for the entire city to see. The story aired on the Thursday evening broadcast, and what unfolded was a stunning display of self-incrimination dressed up as community vigilance. There she was, Eleanor Whitmore, sitting in her flawless living room, donning her finest pearls, speaking in a calm, deliberate tone that tried very hard to come off as reasonable. "I've been documenting suspicious activities in the neighborhood for months," she told journalist Jennifer Walsh. "Jake Thompson claims to be law enforcement, but his actions are anything but professional. He holds secretive meetings with known criminals, receives packages at odd hours, and operates with a level of secrecy typical of organized crime." Lisa and I exchanged glances as we watched, both of us picking up on the deeper implications in her words. Eleanor described my daily habits with such exactness. It was clear she'd been observing me obsessively for quite some time. She listed the times I left and returned home, which neighbors I spoke to, how frequently I received deliveries, even the duration of my conversations. And then came the truly damning moment. On March 15th, Eleanor continued, "I witnessed what I believe was a covert body disposal. He was moving heavy objects under the cover of night, clearly trying to avoid attention. But there was a problem with her timeline, one that would unravel her entire narrative." On March 15th, Eleanor herself had called 911 about the stench coming from her house. "I wasn't even home that evening. I was on a late shift, something my department records could easily verify." Why, then, was Eleanor so obsessed with that specific date? The station had done their homework. Jennifer Walsh pressed further. "Mrs. Whitmore, records show you've contacted emergency services over 30 times in the past 3 months. Some of your neighbors believe you may be creating the very disturbances you report." Eleanor bristled. "Every call I made was justified. This community is under siege by criminal forces, and if no one else is brave enough to act, then I have to be. Someone has to protect this neighborhood." But the most explosive moment came when Walsh brought up Tommy. "We understand your stepson, Tommy Whitmore, hasn't been seen recently. Can you confirm his whereabouts?" The shift in Eleanor's demeanor was immediate. Her hands trembled, and her voice turned sharp and high-pitched. "Tommy is traveling in Europe. He's an adult and doesn't have to report his movements. Young people these days live differently than we did." Walsh didn't let up. "We reached out to his employer. He stopped showing up in March and never gave notice. We also reviewed his social media, no activity for months." "Are you sure he left of his own accord?" Eleanor bolted upright, nearly spilling her coffee. "This interview is over. You people have been manipulated by the same criminal influences that have taken over this neighborhood. Tommy is fine, and I won't stand for these baseless accusations." She stormed off set mid-interview, leaving the cameras rolling and the audience to draw their own conclusions. By the time the segment wrapped up, The internet was already buzzing with speculation, and Eleanor's carefully crafted image was unraveling fast. Within an hour of the broadcast, the Pinewood Heights community forum lit up. Residents who had quietly harbored concerns about Eleanor's erratic behavior now felt emboldened to speak out. The thread quickly ballooned to over 300 comments, as neighbors detailed years of unsettling conduct, harassment, surveillance, and veiled threats, painting a disturbing portrait of a woman unraveling well before Tommy ever vanished. But the most damning revelation didn't come from the usual voices. It came from Mrs. Garcia, Eleanor's other next-door neighbor. She posted a thorough account of what she had witnessed on the night of March 15. "I couldn't sleep that night," her post began, "because a horrible stench was drifting from Eleanor's house. It smelled like something dead was decomposing." She described seeing Eleanor in her backyard around midnight, hosing off a large plastic tarp. Eleanor had been wearing rubber gloves, a face mask, and was constantly glancing over her shoulder, clearly worried she might be seen. The following morning, Mrs. Garcia noted, a professional cleaning crew arrived at Eleanor's home, and by that evening, a brand new air conditioning system had been installed in the basement. Alongside her post, Mrs. Garcia included timestamps and a handful of grainy photos taken from her bedroom window, images she initially captured out of concern for a potential public health issue. Instead, they ended up chronicling what now appeared to be the aftermath of a crime. The pictures revealed Eleanor's backyard under artificial lighting, with visible plastic sheeting, cleaning materials, and a hose being used to scrub down a concrete area near the basement entrance. The post spread like wildfire. By the next morning, it had been reshared across countless neighborhood Facebook groups and local apps. Channel 7 picked up the story as a follow-up to their original interview, running it with the headline, "New Evidence Emerges in Pinewood Heights Mystery." This time, the segment included enhanced versions of Mrs. Garcia's photos, which unmistakably depicted Eleanor in what looked like a full-blown cleanup operation. Eleanor didn't take the exposure quietly. She fired off a panicked response on the community forum, accusing Mrs. Garcia of trespassing and invasion of privacy. She insisted the photos had been digitally manipulated by conspirators, demanded a police investigation into Mrs. Garcia's supposed illegal surveillance, and threatened legal action against anyone she claimed was part of a coordinated harassment campaign designed to distract from real crimes in the neighborhood. But instead of silencing the chatter, Eleanor's frantic posts only deepened the community's skepticism. Her claims grew increasingly erratic. Each new accusation, each wild theory, every plea for police involvement only made it clearer. Eleanor was no longer tethered to reality. The woman who had once called 911 about phantom gun trafficking was now alleging that half the neighborhood was engaged in a criminal plot against her. What Eleanor didn't see coming was that her paranoia would push her into making one final, colossal mistake. In a last-ditch effort to reassert control, she called for an emergency home meeting on Saturday night. She claimed the community was under siege by a criminal network, and that she had no choice but to take action. What she hadn't anticipated was that nearly every resident would show up, and not to support her theories, but to finally confront the woman who had terrorized them for months. The community center overflowed. People lined the walls, stood in doorways, and there weren't enough seats for the crowd that had gathered for what was now the most anticipated showdown in Pinewood Heights history. Eleanor arrived in a stiff business suit, carrying a heavy briefcase, looking every bit like someone convinced she was about to deliver a heroic expose. Copyright. She had even prepared a PowerPoint presentation, grandly titled, "Criminal Networks in Residential Areas, a Case Study." It included photos, timelines, and what she claimed were behavioral patterns pointing to widespread criminal infiltration. For the first 20 minutes, she held the room in a kind of stunned silence, fueled by the sheer boldness of her claims. Her evidence was absurd: photos of me taking out my trash, signing for Amazon packages, chatting with neighbors. "This," she declared, pointing to a slide, "is how organized crime takes root in suburban neighborhoods. The suspect uses law enforcement credentials as a smokescreen while conducting illicit operations in plain sight." She presented charts tracking my vehicle routes, graphs linking my suspicious social interactions, and a neighborhood map dotted with red arrows marking the homes of people she believed to be my alleged accomplices. But the facade cracked when someone finally asked the question everyone had been silently considering. Mrs. Patterson, the sweet 70-year-old who had once borrowed my lawnmower and who Eleanor had bizarrely accused of aiding my imaginary crime ring, stood up. Her voice was calm but firm. "Eleanor," she said, "before you keep pointing fingers at Jake, maybe you should explain what happened to your stepson. Tommy disappeared right around the time you started obsessing over everyone else's business. Where is Tommy now?" Eleanor didn't miss Beata, and that was exactly the problem. Rather than give the simple explanation she'd offered before Rhea that Tommy was in Europe, she flew into a defensive rant that said far more than she intended. "Tommy is an adult who makes his own life choices and decides who he associates with," Eleanor snapped, her voice tight with irritation. "He chose to walk away from this family because others poisoned his mind, filled his head with lies about my finances and baseless legal accusations. They used him as a pawn to try and destroy me, both personally and financially." From the back of the room, Lisa quietly stood and identified herself. "I'm Detective Lisa Mendez with Metro Police. I've handled missing persons cases for over 10 years, she said firmly. "And I can say with confidence that your account of Tommy's departure doesn't align with any of the evidence we've uncovered," she continued, laying out the findings. "Tommy never gave notice at his job, his bank accounts have seen zero activity, his social media presence went completely silent on March 15th, and most concerning of all, someone has been impersonating him, making phone calls to cancel missing person reports that were never actually filed." Eleanor paled visibly. "Detective Mendez didn't stop there. We've also discovered that over $200,000 was withdrawn from Tommy's inheritance accounts following his disappearance. There's a clear pattern of asset liquidation, assets that legally belonged to him." The crowd was silent, tension thick in the air, as Lisa methodically laid out the damning case. "We have records of you purchasing large quantities of industrial cleaning agents, a commercial freezer, and even consulting an attorney about what happens to an estate when a beneficiary becomes unreachable, all within days of March 15th. She glanced at Eleanor, then delivered the final blow. "We also have witness accounts placing you outside your home that night, spraying down plastic tarps in your backyard while wearing gloves and a mask. And, most critically, voice analysis confirms it was you pretending to be Tommy on multiple phone calls, calls clearly intended to avoid drawing police attention." Eleanor's composure shattered. Instead of denying the accusations or requesting an attorney, she lost control completely. "You don't understand what Tommy was about to do to me," she screamed, the carefully maintained mask finally slipping. "After everything I did for him, raising him since he was 12, managing his father's estate, making sure he had every opportunity, he turned on me." Her voice cracked with hysteria. "He hired lawyers to audit my management of his inheritance, threatened to report me for financial abuse. He was going to kick me out of the home I lived in for 15 years. The words kept pouring out, fueled by panic and desperation. "He told me he would expose me, said I was using his estate money for myself. He said he was going to have me arrested, a broken bar, after everything I sacrificed." Her voice trembled with fury and despair. "He was going to ruin me, broken bar, over money I was entitled to. I had no other option." Detective Mendez kept her voice steady. "What do you mean you had no other option, Mrs. Whitmore?" That moment of hesitation flickered in Eleanor's eyes. But she had already gone too far to stop herself. "He's dead," she wailed. "Tommy is dead, and I had to protect everything his father worked for. Tommy would have destroyed Ida Broken Bar just like his father always feared." The room erupted in stunned gasps and horrified whispers. Eleanor had just confessed to murder in front of nearly 40 witnesses, including the SWAT commander and a seasoned detective. But she wasn't finished. As she crumbled emotionally, she revealed even more details that would have taken law enforcement weeks to uncover. "I put antifreeze in his protein shake," she sobbed. "He drank it every morning after his workouts, a broken bar. He never suspected a thing. It took 3 days for him to die. I told him it was the flu. I stayed by his side the entire time." Her confession continued in a downward spiral. "When he finally stopped breathing, I didn't know what to do. I had to keep the body hidden long enough to access the inheritance. I couldn't let anyone find him until everything was secured. That was when I stepped in, taking control of the situation as a SWAT commander. Eleanor Whitmore, you're under arrest for the murder of Tommy Whitmore, I declared, placing her in handcuffs as multiple neighbors frantically called 911. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly recommend you use that right now. But Eleanor was far beyond self-control. Even as I led her toward the exit of the community center, she continued babbling explanations of how she'd used the industrial freezer to preserve Tommy's body, how she drained his accounts and sold off his possessions, constructing a false story that he had left on his own. The emergency home meeting had become a full-blown murder confab witnessed by dozens and captured on multiple phones. Eleanor's months-long campaign to frame me as some neighborhood criminal had instead revealed her to be a cold, calculating killer. But what none of us knew then was that this shocking confession was only the beginning. The following Monday, my SWAT unit conducted a full search of Eleanor's home alongside forensic teams and the coroner's office. As she described, Tommy's body was located and preserved in the freezer she'd bought shortly after poisoning him. But what we found next shook us to the core. In the far corner of her basement, wrapped tightly in plastic sheeting, were skeletal remains. They belonged to her first husband, Robert Whitmore, the man she told everyone had died of a heart attack 5 years earlier. A forensic autopsy would later confirm the truth. Robert had been slowly poisoned with arsenic over a period of months. The dosage was subtle enough to mimic the symptoms of natural heart failure. During that time, Eleanor had kept meticulous records of his deteriorating health in a journal, crafting the illusion of a devoted wife watching her husband waste away. Eleanor had successfully convinced everyone, including their family doctor, that Robert's death was simply the result of his long-standing heart problems. No one suspected a thing, and she collected his life insurance payout without raising any red flags. But Tommy's murder showed how Eleanor had grown more calculated. Investigators uncovered computer searches on her laptop for untraceable poisons, ethylene glycol symptoms, and how long antifreeze stays in the body. She had chosen antifreeze specifically because its effects resembled a common flu, making it easier to explain away Tommy's rapid decline if questioned. More disturbing than the method were Eleanor's detailed journals. She had documented every stage of her victim's suffering with the chilling detachment of someone who believed she was entirely justified. She didn't see herself as a murderer, she saw herself as someone protecting what was rightfully hers. The financial probe exposed the full magnitude of her crimes. Over the previous 5 years, Eleanor had funneled nearly $600,000 out of various family accounts through life insurance, inheritance funds, and other sources. The money was used to support her lifestyle, cover gambling debts she kept hidden, and acquire luxury items she concealed from everyone. To the outside world, Eleanor Whitmore was a self-proclaimed pillar of Pinewood Heights, but behind that mask was a woman who had quietly destroyed her own family for personal gain. The neighborhood's reaction was a mix of shock, relief, and unsettling introspection. People who had lived under Eleanor's oppressive gaze realized they had narrowly escaped becoming her next targets. Mrs. Garcia discovered a notebook among Eleanor's trash that held notes on each household, tracking routines, relationships, and finances, as if she were mapping out future victims. The Johnsons uncovered research on life insurance procedures following accidental deaths, and the Pattersons found damning proof that Eleanor had been slowly poisoning their doga using the same antifreeze that had killed Tommy. Once Eleanor's confessions were backed by concrete evidence, the legal process moved quickly. She was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with a laundry list of offenses including fraud, identity theft for impersonating Tommy, and numerous charges related to surveillance and harassment. Her attorney attempted to argue temporary insanity, but the methodical planning, detailed records, and financial motives painted a different picture of that of a calculating individual who had known exactly what she was doing. The trial attracted widespread media coverage. Throughout the proceedings, Eleanor showed no remorse. She insisted that her actions were necessary to protect family assets from those she considered ungrateful and wasteful. She claimed she had merely helped Robert find peace during his illness, completely failing to grasp that slowly poisoning someone was not mercy, but murder. The jury needed less than 4 hours to return a unanimous verdict. guilty on all major charges. The judge sentenced Eleanor Whitmore to life imprisonment with no chance of parole, calling her crimes a chilling display of deliberate cruelty. Even during sentencing, she doubled down, stating that Tommy had brought it on himself by threatening her legacy. "Ungrateful children who turn on their families," she said, "get what they deserve." 6 months later, life in Pinewood Heights began to return to a new normal, though scarred by the realization that a killer had lived among them. The community used the experience to reform their hopeless ESA, placing limits on surveillance and cracking down on harassment. Eleanor's reign of fear became a cautionary tale about what happens when paranoia is given power. The neighborhood forum, a once her soapbox for rumors and control, it transformed into a space for genuine community support. Neighbors started looking out for each other in ways that actually mattered. As for me, I finally enjoy my morning coffee on a porch without feeling strained on me. But I've kept a few of Eleanor's habits. In a sense, I pay attention to those around me, not to catch them doing wrong, but to recognize when someone might be struggling or when something feels truly off. Because if there's one thing Eleanor taught me, it's this: the people who shout the loudest about morality are often hiding the darkest truths. The cabin I bought through years of honest police work is still my safe haven. But now it stands as a symbol to reminding me that some of the most dangerous criminals are the ones cloaked in moral authority. Eleanor Whitmore spent months painting me as the threat to our neighborhood, but in the end, she was the real monster, hiding in plain sight. Justice may be slow, but when it finally arrives, it's powerful. We all have that one neighbor who gives us an uneasy feeling. The one who watches too closely, knows too much, and never misses a thing. If the story hit close to home, you're not alone. I share these real-life HOA stories because I know how important it is to see justice done and evil revealed. Your instincts are important. If these stories of karma and justice resonate with you, be sure to like and subscribe to HOA Story SA, where the truth always comes to light, and justice gets the final word.